Hi everyone. Today I want to talk about the petrodollar. I'm going to do a couple of videos on this, but I just want to put this out there because when I look at YouTube and then I look at other sources of information, I don't see many people talking about it, and then those who are talking about it seem like they only have a piece of the information. They don't have an oil background to talk about it, so I wanted to create this video to give you perspective on what actually happened because it was quite a big deal um, earlier this year. So in 1944, after World War II, we meaning the U.S., went into agreement with the world to make the dollar the reserve currency, and the dollar was backed by gold. You could convert $35 to 1 ounce of gold, and all the other currencies were pegged to the US dollar. So, in essence, the entire world was pegged to the dollar. We had the privilege for many years of being the world reserve currency, and that our currency was backed by gold. We started going and doing a lot of wars in the US, and it caused us to take on more debt and print more currency than we had backing of gold. And countries like France started asking for their gold um, in exchange for dollars. And it got really bad to the point where Nixon in 1971 changed our monetary policy from being a gold backed dollar to being a fiat based dollar. And it fundamentally changed overnight. He just came on during the evening and just made a quick announcement, and our world changed. Very few people figured it out at the time, but over the course of a number of years, people realized, and then the 70s were plagued with stagflation. To solve this problem, the US made a deal with Saudi Arabia, which was the largest producer of oil at the time, to only sell their barrels of crude in exchange for dollars. So for a currency to have any meaning, it has to have some commodity that backs it up. Whether it be gold, whether it be wheat, whether it be crude oil, it has to have some kind of anchor to back up the demand for that currency. So at the time, prior to 1971, there was demand for gold via the dollar. You could exchange your dollars for gold. Then we had to make the entire world force them to be like, hey, if you want to consume crude oil in the world, it has to go through dollar. So it created dollar demand. And then we allowed other countries to develop during that process. And because to develop requires energy, and as the primary source of energy is crude oil, it created, there was increased demand in crude, and the only way you could buy crude is through the dollar. So there was increased demand of the dollar. So we could print as many dollars as we wanted to, and because there was increased demand in crude oil, there was increased demand in dollars, and we never felt inflation because in the US we could just export our inflation because we had all these other countries that needed our dollars to develop themselves up. So we just exported our inflation and we never experienced any inflation because there was so much dollar demand because there was increase in energy. And as you can see, this is the BP Statistical Review of World Energy. It's a free report that you can pull off of BP's website. It's pretty much the industry standard for analyzing all energy products out there. It's published once a year. It's totally free. You can either get it in this PDF document or you can get the raw data in Excel. But just for purposes of this conversation, I wanted to show the demand from 1944 to 2019. As you can see, there was like under 70 million barrels daily consumption in 1994, but over the course of looks like 25 years, so like it increased by almost 50% during that time period. So because of this increased consumption of oil, we could print as much money as we wanted to. So here is Fred. It's the Federal Reserve's economic data. It's probably the most reliable source of economic data out there. You can go on their website, and then this shows M2 money stock. So this is basically how much money is out in circulation, how much they have printed out there, right? So if you look at this, right, from 1994, right, it was like 3.5 billion. And then over the course of that time period, we just keep on printing, but it's pretty much a linear slope, like how this oil consumption is. So because of this linear slope, we were able to keep on printing in basically 1-to-1 to the oil demand. And that's why when people talk about, oh yeah, we're printing so much money, but it doesn't really matter, because we never feel it in the US. Our food cost stays pretty much the same. Our housing is a little bit up, but it's okay. But everything is, I'm not seeing like bread lines like how in Venezuela or Zimbabwe, and we can just print and it's no big deal. And people got uncomfortable with this idea because we just export our inflation. But there was something very big that happened. For years, I've been predicting that oil would go to zero, and people are like, Zishan, you shouldn't say that. You're a professional. There's no reason for you to say it will go to zero. You can say it's going to be very low, but you shouldn't say zero. I'm like, no, it's going to zero. Like, there's just too much oil and there's not enough demand. Oil has to go to zero. I was very wrong. So here is a price chart from MarketWatch, if it wants to pop. So let me change it real quick. So there was this day on 4/20/2020. Okay. That day I was glued to the screen. Minute by minute, I was watching the WTI. This is West Texas Intermediate. Just give you an idea. West Texas. So WTI is the price of oil at Cushing, Oklahoma. Cushing is the primary hub for all oil in the United States. All the oil that comes from the West Texas and the Balkan up in North Dakota, and then even offshore, off the coast of Louisiana, all the oil first flows to Cushing and then gets distributed through pipelines across the U.S. Mainly. Sometimes there's pipelines that go every which way based off of contracts, but WTI is the best indicator of what the price of oil is in the US. And I was looking at this on this day, and I was watching it go. First, it was like, it went down to $10, and I was like, oh man, you can get you can get a barrel of oil for the price of a pizza from Domino's. And then I saw it go to $5. I'm like, oh man, you can get a barrel of oil for the price of a latte from Starbucks. And then it went to zero. And then I was like, holy crap, this is insane. And then like it went, then I saw a minus in front of the number, and I thought it was like the net change, dollar change for the day. And then I realized oil was trading negatively. It had went to minus $37.63. Just to give you perspective, this is the most highly sought after product in the entire world. And it is extremely liquid in selling. At that particular day, people were saying, look, there is no storage in the entire US for oil. I would have to rent a tanker if I buy this contract from you, I would have to rent a tanker and bring the tanker over here in the next 30 days and then fill it up with the oil that you need to sell me. Because of that, and that cost of the tanker and all the manpower associated with it, you'll have to pay me $37.63 to take this oil off your hands. And a seller agreed to that, and a buyer agreed to that as well, which is insane. In finance, you're never taught that assets can go negative. Only until 2015, I started pondering the idea of negative interest rates, which I'll have a video on later, but this was insane. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, the second it happened, I went to the bank. The bank was locked because of the health situation, and I was banging on the door, and then nobody opened up the door, and then I had the manager's cell phone number, so I called the manager, and I was like, "You gotta let me in," and she thought I was crazy, and then I was like, "You need to let me in." She's like, "Honey, you don't have a mask." And I was like, "Okay, I understand. Let me go to my car and get a jacket." So then I wrapped my face with a jacket. I went in. I wired all my money out of my bank account and bought gold. Because I understood at that moment in time that this was the end of the petrodollar. For it to go negative, somebody agreed that we no longer want to do business with the US. Let's tank their market. At that point in time, I thought we were going to war because I didn't question the political situation at that time. And based off the history I've studied, normally when people threaten outside forces, threaten the petrodollar, we go to war. Examples are Iraq, the assassination of Gaddafi, our situation with Iran, like our Cold War between China and the US, and even the sanctions that we've previously done to Russia. Because the narrative is we need to protect our way of life and our freedom. And the only way we can protect our way of life and our freedom is for the dollar to remain strong. And if we allow outside forces to trade oil in currencies other than the dollar, then the demand for the dollars will decrease. And then as demand for dollars decrease, that inflation that we've been exporting comes to the US and food prices go up and our way of life becomes impossible, and then we can't support our military because our currency is so weak that we can't pay people to defend us. So legitimately our way of life goes away, and they weren't lying about that. It was the truth. So that's why they've protected the petrodollar for so long, and that's why we go to these wars, is we must protect the petrodollar. The fact that we have not gone to war and nothing was discussed in mainstream media about this, it made me question the reality that I previously was living. Because the petrodollar is done. That day, that's right there, 4/20/2020, will go down in history as the day when the petrodollar collapsed. And the fact that we didn't go to war means we as a country have made an agreement for a new system. That's usually how it goes. First, the currency goes. Let me give you an example of this. So, in Germany, their currency went to crap. Hitler came about because they couldn't pay down their debts, and they wanted to create a new monetary system. The only way you can create a new monetary system is by influencing other world leaders to get into the monetary system. So either you can do it peacefully or you can do it through kinetic warfare. So we did it through kinetic warfare, and obviously Hitler lost, but a new monetary system came about, which is the Bretton Woods Agreement in 1944. Now we're in that same situation again, where the currency's in question and the petrodollar collapsed. We typically go to war, but the fact that we did not go to war and there was no kinetic issues leads me to believe that there is an agreement for a new system. And it took me a long time to come to that conclusion. And I'll create the next video will be about the new system. But we're going into a new system. And this was clear indication that, hey, we're going to a new system. The dollar is done. And to reinforce that they reinflated this price, right? After it collapsed, the price went up, and it's been roughly around 40, in the 40-ish range. Just to let you know, for U.S. shale, which is the primary output of U.S. oil, it typically costs upstream companies to drill for oil to be $42. That's their break-even price, and it has to be above. If it's below $42 for 3 to 4 months, the companies will go bankrupt. And as you can see, right, like back in March, it was below the $40 limit for 3 months. $42 limit for 3 months. And it slightly went up above 42, but it's not enough to materially change the liquidity position. And now it's back down to $40.27. So since it's below the $42 limit, a lot of companies in the US, oil companies, are having major issues with their debt. So here's an article about, this is from the Shipping News. So like this article says that S&P Global Ratings, right, says that oil and gas sector leads the global default rate. And as you can see right here, this is the default rate. That is not good. All right, so like roughly, it looks like roughly 33%, 32% of oil and gas companies are defaulting on their mortgages. All right, and then I want to talk about this article. So this is an article about Schlumberger. So Schlumberger is the largest oil and gas service industry. They're a good leading indicator in the for oil companies because they are the Exxons, the Shells hire them to help them figure out whether to go help them figure out where to drill and what to do. So they usually get paid. Their revenues come the earliest versus all the other players in the oil and gas industry. So since you can figure out whether there's an oil boom or bust versus them, because if they're making money, that means the whole industry as a whole will be making money for a couple years. If they're losing money, then you know, hey, the whole industry is going to lose money going forward. So for the past couple of years, like Schlumberger was getting into the drilling business in North America because of the shale boom, and they were throwing money left and right. But recently, they sold their entire U.S. and Canadian fracking business, okay, to Liberty Oilfield Services. The entire North American fracking business, they sold it, okay? They basically said, like, look, there is no hope for the U.S. oil industry, period. We're getting out of it completely. There's nothing here, okay? It's one thing if they sold it for some cash, okay? They went running and screaming, and they just did an all-stock transaction. It's so bad, okay, that no bank, these assets that they sold, no bank wants to give them debt, give Liberty debt to buy the assets, and no equity firm, no private equity firm, nobody wants to give them cash for these assets, okay? Not a penny. They're worthless. They're basically saying. When it says all stock transaction, that means like the whole asset is worthless. And because it's worthless, they are only getting paper for it. It might as well be toilet paper at this point. But this deal symbolizes what the future for this industry is. That all these businesses are going to go bankrupt. Their assets are worthless, basically, because they realize that oil is worthless with it going negative. If they can get it out without paying anybody, that's a great deal, which Schlumberger did. They basically sold it for zero. It's better than paying Liberty Oil money to take the assets from them. So the petrodollar is done. This is clear. Like, this is with Schlumberger selling their fracking business, this is a leading indicator that the petrodollar is done. Another indicator, leading indicator, is crude oil rigs, right? So these are basically drilling rigs in the U.S. You can see this chart goes like into the 80s, but basically, like, after the 2008 collapse, Obama initiated the shale boom, right? They decreased the regulations for fracking, and they allowed all the money that was printed in QE by the Fed went to creating an energy. The narrative back then, I remember watching the news, was like, because T-Bone Pickens used to come on CNBC and basically say, look, like, we are so dependent on foreign countries for our national security, and we need to make sure the U.S. is energy independent, which is true. We should not be dependent on foreign countries for our national security. So the narrative was being played that, hey, look, we need to have oil and gas industry in the US. We need to invest in oil and gas in the US. So the banks put a lot of money into fracking, and you can see like the rig count went well over 1,500. This was when uh the price of the pump was like over $5. And then you had the crash in 2015. I remember that. I was there in the oil industry watching that crash. And then Trump came in, and then he made sure they were okay. But this crash is pretty permanent. This is the end of the petrodollar. And with you're seeing this Schlumberger showing the sale, they believe that this is permanent as well. They would not sell this, okay? They would not sell their fracking business if they believed there was a V-shaped recovery with this graph, okay? If it was V-shape, they would not sell. They're smart guys. These guys, most of these guys are engineers. They've worked on rigs. At their peak, they used to classify themselves as the Apple of the oil industry. Their technology is one of a kind. They were the peak. So if they're selling, they believe this is a permanent situation as well. Another indication that this is a permanent situation with the petrodollar is Trump is signing peace deals between Israel and Middle Eastern countries. First was UAE, then Bahrain. This is happening because this is all about money. It's nothing about religion. It's always about money. And the reason why these guys are selling, making a deal, is because they understand that the petrodollar is done. Their negotiation ability with the US in regards to the commodity that they have in their country is no longer valid. So they cannot push buttons. They need to find other revenue streams. And the only way they can find other revenue streams is if they make a deal with Israel and the US to allow them to have other revenue streams. If they do not, these countries are going to go back to the way they were pre-oil boom. And there's nothing they can do about it because that's all they have. They're in the desert. They can't grow vegetables. They don't have any manufacturing capabilities. All they have is oil. So they have to make a deal so that other countries will want to work with them. This is why you're seeing all these peace deals. So this is the first part of the petrodollar. Next part, I'm going to tell you what I believe is the plan going forward, what the new framework is going to be. But the main idea is US dollar dominance is done. We cannot export our inflation going forward. Our inflation is going to be experienced by us, and we are going to a world where there will be a level playing field where we are at the same level as every other country in the world. Before, we were king and everybody else was beneath us, and they were on a level playing field. We are going to come down and we will be at the same level as everyone else. Trump has said this. In the next video, I'll explain more. But a new monetary system is coming, and it's best that you prepare for it because there is enough clues out there that it is showing. With oil going negative, it was very traumatizing for me, to be honest. with how much I know about uh, the oil industry globally and the banking industry, and seeing it go negative, I couldn't sleep that night, to be quite frank. Uh, it was quite overwhelming. And that's why I put all the money I had at that point into gold, was because the dollar dominance is done. I don't want to have any assets that are denominated in dollars. I don't want to sign a contract where somebody pays me in dollars. Um, I want to be independent of the dollar because the new framework is coming, and with what I'm seeing, the dollar is not going to be the king. So I will end with that, and I'll see you soon. Have a good night. Bye.